Class 12th Psychology, Chapter 6, Attitude and Social Cognition. Explaining social behavior. Social behavior is a necessary part of human life, and being social means much more than merely being in the company of others. You may recall from what you have studied in class 11th that social psychology deals with all behavior that takes place in the actual, imagined, or implied presence of others. Take this simple example. If you have to memorize a poem or recite it, you may have no problem in doing this when you are by yourself. But if you have to recite this poem in front of an audition, your performance might get influenced because you are now in a social situation. Even imagining that people are listening to your recitation may change your performance. Because of social influences, people form views or attitudes about people and about different issues in life that exist in the form of behavioral tendencies. When we meet people, we make inferences about their personal qualities. This is called impression formation. We are also interested in why people behave in the ways they do. That is, we assign causes to the behavior shown in specific social situations. This process is called attribution. Very often, impression formation and attributions are influenced by attitudes. These three possesses are examples of mental activities related to gathering and interpretation of information about the social world, collectively called social cognition. Moreover, social cognition is activated by cognitive units called schemas. Cognitive processes cannot be directly seen. They have to be inferred on the basis of externally shown behavior. There are other examples of social influence that are in the form of observable behavior. Two such examples are social facilitation and inhibition, that is the improvement decline in performance in presence of others, and helping or pro-social behavior, that is responding to others who are in need or distress. In order to understand completely how the social context influences the individual, it is necessary to study both social cognitive processes and social behavior. Nature and components of attitude. For a few minutes, quietly do the following mental exercise. Today, how many times did you tell yourself, in my opinion, or others may say so, but I feel, etc. When you fill in those blanks, these are called opinions. Now continue the exercise. How important are these opinions to you? The topics of some of these opinions may be only moderately important to you. They are simple ways of thinking, and it does not matter how much to you that others agree or disagree with your views. On the other hand, you may find that some topics are extremely important to you. If someone opposes or challenges your views about these topics, you get emotional. You may have made some of these views part of your behavior. In other words, if your views are not merely thoughts but also have emotional and action components, then these views are more like attitudes. All definitions of attitudes agree that an attitude is a state of mind, a set of views or thoughts regarding some topic which have an evaluative feature. It is accompanied by an emotional component and a tendency to act in a particular way with regard to the attitude object. The thought component is referred to as the cognitive aspect. The emotional component is known as the affective aspect, and the tendency to act is called behavioral aspect. Taken together, these three aspects have been referred to as the ABC component. Note that attitudes are themselves not behavior, but they represent a tendency to behave or act in certain ways. They are part of cognition along with an emotional component and cannot be observed from the outside. Attitudes have to be distinguished from two other closely related concepts, namely beliefs and values. Beliefs refer to the cognitive component of attitude and form the ground on which attitudes stand, such as belief in God or belief in democracy as a political ideology. Values and attitudes or beliefs that contain a should or ought aspect, such as moral or ethical values. One example of a value is that the idea that one should work hard or one should always be honest, because honesty is the best policy. Values are formed when a particular belief or attitude becomes an inseparable part of a person's outlook on life. Consequently, values are difficult to change. In addition to affective, cognitive, and behavioral components, attitudes also have other properties. Four significant features of attitudes are valence, extremeness, simplicity or complexity, and centrality. Valence. The valence of an attitude tells us whether an attitude is positive or negative. Extremeness. The extremeness of an attitude indicates how positive or negative an attitude is. Simplicity or complexity. This feature refers to how many attitudes there are within a broader attitude. Think of an attitude as a family containing several member attitudes. In case of various topics such as health and world peace, people hold many attitudes instead of single attitude. An attitude system is said to be simple if it contains only one or a few attitudes and complex if it contains many attitudes. Centrality. This refers to the role of a particular attitude in attitude system. An attitude with greater centrality would influence the other attitudes in the system much more than non-central attitude would. Attitude formation and change. Attitude formation. In general, attitudes are learned through one's own experiences and through interaction with others. There are a few research studies that show some sort of inborn aspects of attitudes, but such generic influences attitudes only indirectly along with learning. Therefore, most social psychologists have focused on the conditions which lead to the learning of attitudes. Processes of attitude formation. The processes and conditions of learning may be different, resulting in varying attitudes among people. Learning attitude by association, learning attitudes by being rewarded or punished, learning attitudes through modeling, that is, observing others, learning attitudes through group or cultural norms, learning through exposure to information. Factors that influence attitude formation. The following factors provide the context for learning of attitudes through the processes described above. Family and school environment. Particularly in the early years of life, parents and other family members play a significant role in shaping attitude formation. Later, the school environment becomes an important background for attitude formation. Reference groups. Reference groups indicate to an individual the norms regarding acceptable behavior and ways of thinking. Thus, they reflect the learning of attitudes through a group or cultural norms. 3. Personal experiences. Many attitudes are formed not in the family environment or through reference groups but through direct personal experiences which bring about a drastic change in our attitude towards people and our own life. Media related influences. Technological advances in recent times have made audiovisual media and the internet very powerful sources of information that lead to attitude formation and change. In addition, school level textbooks also influence attitude formation. Attitude change. During the process of attitude formation and also after the process, attitudes may be changed and modified through various influences. Some attitudes change more than others do. Attitudes that are still in the formative stage and are more like opinions are much more likely to change compared to attitudes which have become firmly established and have become a part of individuals' values. From a practical point of view, bringing about a change in the people's attitudes is of interest to community leaders, politicians, producers or of consumer goods, advertisers and others. Process of attitude change. Three major concepts that draw attention to some important processes in attitude change are described for below. The concept of balance, proposed by Fritz Heider, is sometimes described as the form of POX triangle, which represents the relationship between three aspects or components of attitude. P is the person whose attitude is being studied, O is another person, and X is the topic towards which the attitude is being studied. The basic idea is that an attitude changes if there is a state of imbalance between PO attitude, OX attitude, and PX attitude. This is because imbalance is logically uncomfortable. Therefore, attitude changes in the direction of balance. Imbalance found in the when all three sides of triangle are negative or two sides are positive, one side is negative. Balance is found when all three sides are positive or two sides are negative and one side is positive. The concept of cognitive dissonance was proposed by Leon Fettinger. It emphasizes the cognitive component. Here, the basic idea is that cognitive components of an attitude must be consonant, that is, they should be logically in line with each other. An individual finds that two cognitions in an attitude are dissonant, then one of them will be changed in the direction of consonance. Both balance and cognitive dissonance are examples of cognitive consistency. Cognitive consistency means that two components, aspects, or elements of the same attitude or attitude system must be in the same direction. Each element should logically fall in line with other elements. If this does not happen, then the person experiences a kind of mental discomfort, that is, the sense that something is not quite right in the attitude system. In such a state, some aspects in the attitude system changes in the direction of consistency because our cognitive system requires logical consistency. The two-step concept was proposed by S.M. Mohsin, an Indian psychologist. According to him, attitude change takes place in the form of two steps. In the first step, the target of change identifies with the source. The target is the person whose attitude is to be changed. The source is the person through whose influence the change is going to take place. Identification means that target has liking and regard for the source. He or she puts himself or herself in place of the target and tries to feel like him or her. The sources must also have a positive attitude towards the target, and regard and attraction becomes mutual. In the second step, the source himself or herself shows attitude change by actually changing him or her behavior towards the attitude object. Observing the source's changed attitude and behavior, the target also shows an attitude change through behavior. This is a kind of imitation or observational learning. Factors that influence attitude change. Whenever attitudes will change, and if so, to what extent, is the question that puzzles many psychologists. However, most of them agree upon the following major factors that influence attitude change. Characteristics of existing attitude, source characteristics, message characteristics, etc. Finally, the mode of spreading the message plays a significant role. Target characteristics. Qualities of the target such as persuability, strong prejudices, self-esteem and intelligence influence the likelihood and extent of attitude change. Attitude-behavior relationship. We usually expect behavior to follow logically from attitudes. However, an individual's attitudes may not be always exhibited through behavior. Likewise, one's actual behavior may not be contrary to one's attitude towards a particular topic. Psychologists have found that there would be consistency between attitudes and behavior when the attitude is strong and occupies a central place in the attitude system. The person is aware of his or her attitude. There is very little or no external pressure for the person to behave in a particular way. The person's behavior is not being watched or evaluated by others. The person thinks that the behavior would have a positive consequence and therefore intends to engage in that behavior. Prejudice and discrimination. Prejudices are examples of attitude towards a particular group. They are usually negative and in many cases may be based on stereotypes about the specific group. As will be discussed below in the section on social cognition, a stereotype is a cluster of ideas regarding the characteristics of a specific group. All members belonging to this group are assumed to possess these characteristics. Often, stereotypes consist of undesirable characteristics about the target group, and they lead to negative attitudes or prejudices towards the members of specific group. Social psychologists have shown that prejudice has one or more of the following sources. Learning. Like other attitudes, prejudices can also be learned through association, reward and punishment, observing others, group of or cultural norms, and exposure to information that encourages prejudice. The family, reference groups, personal experiences, and the media may play a role in attitude in learning of prejudices. A strong social identity and in-group bias. Individuals who have a strong sense of social identity and have a very positive attitude towards their own group boost this attitude by holding negative attitudes towards other groups. These are shown as prejudices. Scapegoating. This is a phenomenon by which the majority group places the blame on a minority outgroup for its own social, economic, or political problems. Kernel of truth concept. Sometimes people may continue to hold stereotypes because they think that, after all, there must be some truth or kernel of truth in, in what everyone says about the other groups. Self fulfilling prophecy. In some cases, the group that is the target of prejudice is itself responsible for continuing the prejudice. The target group may behave in ways that justify the prejudice, that is, confirm the negative expectations. Strategies for handling prejudice. Knowing about the causes or sources would be the first step in handling prejudice. Thus, the strategies for handling prejudice would be effective if they aim at minimizing opportunities for learning prejudices, changing such attitudes, de emphasizing a narrow social identity based on the in group, and discouraging the tendency towards self fulfilling prophecy among the victims of prejudice. These goals can be accomplished through education and information dissemination for correct stereotypes related to specific target groups and tackling the problem of a strong in-group bias. Increasing intergroup contact allows for direct communication, removal of mistrust between the groups, and even discovery of positive qualities in the outgroup. However, these strategies are successful only if the two groups meet in a cooperative rather than competitive context. Close interactions between the groups help them to get to know each other better. The other two groups are not different in power or status, highlighting individual identity rather than group identity, thus weakening the importance of group and as a basis for evaluating the other person. More details about the social identity and intergroup conflict have been presented in the next chapter. Social cognition. Cognition refers to all those mental processes that deal with the obtaining and processing of information. Extending the idea to the social world, the term social cognition refers to all those psychological processes that deal with the gathering and processing of information related to social objects. These include all the processes that help in understanding, explaining, and interpreting social behavior. Schemas and stereotypes. A schema is defined as a mental structure that provides framework, set of rules or guidelines for processing the information about any object. Schemas are the basic units of storage in our memory and function as shorthand ways of processing information, thus reducing the time and mental effort required in cognition. In case of social cognition, the basic units are social schemas. Some attitudes may also function like social schemas. We use many different schemas and come to know about them through analysis and example. Most of the schemas are in the form of categories or classes. Schemas that function in the form of categories are called prototypes, which are the entire set of features or qualities that help us to define an object completely. In social cognition, category based schemas that are related to a group of people are called stereotypes. These are category based schemas that are overgeneralized and are not directly verified and do not allow for exceptions. Impression formation and explaining behavior of others through attitude and attribution. Every social interaction begins with the formation of an impression about the persons we meet. Public figures and applicants appearing for job interviews are good examples that show it is very important to make a good impression on others. The process of coming to know a person can be broadly divided into two parts: impression formation and attribution. The person who forms the impression is called a perceiver. The individual about whom the impression is formed is called a target. The perceiver gathers information or responds to the given information about the qualities of target, organizes this information and draws inferences about the target. Impression formation and attribution are influenced by the nature of information available to the perceiver, social schemas in the perceiver, personality characteristics of the perceiver, and situational factors. Impression formation. The following aspects have been found in the impression formation. The process of impression formation consists of the following three sub-processes. Selection. We take into account only some bits of information about the target person. Organization. The selected information is combined in a systematic way. And inference. We draw a conclusion about the what kind of person the target is. Some specific qualities influence impression formation more than the traits do. The other and the order of sequence in which information is presented affects the kind of impression formed. Mostly, the information presented first has a stronger effect than presented in the end. This is called primacy effect. However, if a perceiver may be asked to pay attention to all the information and not only merely to the first information, whatever information comes at the end has a stronger influence. This is called as recency effect. We have a tendency to think that a target person who has one set of positive qualities must also be having other specific positive qualities that are associated with the first set. Attribution of causality. After forming an impression, we often go through a process of assigning causes to a person's behavior. This is also a systematic process. As indicated by the researchers done on attribution, the following aspects of attribution have been found. When we assign a cause to a person's behavior, we can broadly classify the cause as being internal, something within the person, or external, something outside the person. When people make attributions for success and failure, the causes they give can be classified into internal and external factors, and also into stable and unstable factors. Bernard Weiner suggested a classification which you will learn ahead. In making attributions, there is an overall tendency of people to give greater weightage to the internal or dispositional factors than the external or situational factors. This is called fundamental attribution error. There is a difference between the attribution made for success and that made for failure. A distinction as is also found between the attributions that a person makes for his or her own positive and negative experiences and the attribution made for another person's positive and negative experiences. Behavior in the presence of others. One of the first observed observations made about social behavior, was that performance on specific tasks is influenced by the mere presence of others. This is called social facilitation. Better performance in the presence of others is because the person experiences arousal, which makes the person react in a more intense manner. This explanation was given by Zonk. The name is pronounced to rhyme with science. The arousal is because the person feels he or she is being evaluated. The nature of tasks to be performed also affects the performance in the presence of others. For example, in case of simple or familiar tasks, the person is more sure of performing well and the eagerness to get praise or reward is stronger. So the individual performs better in the presence of others than he or she does it alone. If the others present are also performing the same task, this situation is called coaction. In this situation, there is social comparison and competition. Once again, the task is simple or a familiar one. Performance is better under coaction than when the person is alone. Pro-social behavior. Throughout the world, doing good to others and being helpful is described as a virtue. All religions teach us that we should help those who are in need. This behavior is called helping or pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior has the following characteristics. It must aim to benefit or do good to another person or other persons. Be done without expecting anything in return. Be done willingly by the person and not because any kind of pressure is on him or her. Involve some difficulty or cost to the person giving help. In spite of the great value and importance attached to pro-social behavior, people do not show such behavior very often. Immediately after the Bombay blast on 11 July 2006, the community stepped forward to help the blast victims in any way they could. By contrast, on the earlier occasion, nobody came forward to help a girl on moving suburban train in Mumbai when her purse was being snatched. The other passengers did nothing to help, and the girl was thrown out of the train. Even as the girl was lying injured on the railway tracks, people living in the buildings around the area did not come to help her. Factors influencing pro-social behavior. Pro-social behavior is based on an inborn, natural tendency in human beings to help other members of their own species. This inborn tendency facilitates survival of the species. Pro-social behavior is influenced by learning. Individuals who are brought up in a family environment that sets examples of helping others, emphasizes helping as a value, and praises helpfulness and showing more pro-social behavior than individuals who are brought up in a family environment devoid of these features. Cultural factors influence pro-social behavior. Some cultures actively encourage people to help the needy and distressed. Pro-social behavior is expressed when the situation activates certain social norms that require helping others. These norms have been mentioned in the context of pro-social behavior. The norm of social responsibility: we should help anyone who needs help without considering any other factor. The norm of reciprocity: we should help those persons who have helped us in the past. The norm of equity: We should help others whenever we find that it's fair to do so. Pro-social behavior is affected by the expectations reactions of a person who is being helped. Pro-social behavior is more likely to be shown in individuals who have a high level of empathy, that is, the capacity to feel the distress of person who is to be helped, such as Dr. Babasaheb Amte, Mother Teresa, etc. Prosocial behavior may be reduced by factors such as bad mood, being busy, and with one's own problem, or the feeling that the person to be helped is responsible for his or her situation. Prosocial behavior may also be reduced when the number of bystanders is more than one. In this chapter, you have learned about the basic concepts of attitude and social cognition and got a glimpse from of some forms of social behavior. In the next chapter, you will learn about the influence of groups and individuals.